Thank you, Cian Corla. Cian Corla, the motion before the House provides a comprehensive policy solution to the mortgage crisis. It was compiled with significant input from a cross-party report by the Finance Committee and with expert input from people working in the field. Cian Corla, the motion before the House, if implemented, will immediately and substantially increase the pace at which the mortgage crisis is resolved. It will provide consistency, transparency and fairness to how borrowers are dealt with by the different banks. It will ensure that every opportunity is explored to keep people in their homes. It will ensure people are treated with dignity and that they have access to necessary financial expertise and legal representation. It will ensure that so-called sustainable mortgage restructures are truly sustainable, both for the lender and for the borrower. It will minimise the need for the state to house people after possession orders are granted, and will ensure that those needs are met where needed. It will avoid the use of strategic default and ensure that solutions are sought for those who cannot pay rather than those who will not pay. It will turn the insolvency legislation and bankruptcy into the tools they are meant to be rather than the failures they currently are. It will turn the mortgage to rent scheme into a viable route for many people. It will leave the state with additional social housing stock at no additional cost to the state. The motion before the House will do this at minimal cost and maximum gain to the Exchequer. It requires no additional recapitalisation of the banks with public money. Cian Corla, this motion is not politically motivated. It recognises positive trends in the mortgage crisis. It recognises policy efforts both by the Government and by the Central Bank of Ireland. It brings to the Dáil many recommendations of the Finance Committee report, which were published last year. Cian Corla, had the measures in this motion been implemented in 2011, the mortgage crisis would by now be a thing of the past. The economy would be growing faster than it currently is, the public finances would be healthier, unemployment would be lower, and untold social harm and distress over the last number of years would have been avoided. But the measures in this motion have yet to be implemented. As a result, in December, over 150,000 mortgages in Ireland were still in arrears. There's about 400,000 men, women and children living in these homes. So what do they face? The Joint Committee on Finance, Public Expenditure and Reform last year published a report supported by every member of that committee bar one, and that one was not a government deputy. We met with the chief executives of the four main banks. We met with organisations who work with borrowers on a daily basis. We met with the Insolvency Service of Ireland and the official assignee in bankruptcy. Excuse me. We met with the Governor of the Central Bank and received submissions from professional bodies, including those representing the personal insolvency practitioners. So what did we find? We found that for those in mortgage arrears, they're facing a system that is neither transparent nor consistent. We found that while some lenders are making efforts, others are not, particularly, in my opinion, Bank of Ireland. We found that the personal insolvency process was clearly not delivering personal insolvency or bankruptcy arrangements at any scale. We found that sustainability was narrowly defined from the point of view of the lender and not the borrower. We found that many mortgage restructures didn't have a plan for when borrowers retired, other than they had to sell their home. I move the motion. Thank you, Cian Corla. I am sharing my time. We found that some lenders were far too keen to initiate legal proceedings. We found a lack of transparency for borrowers, for example, in explaining why particular restructuring options were being offered but not others. We found the mortgage to rent scheme was next to useless. we found that there were potential solutions available that were not being offered and not being developed by all of the lenders, such as debt for equity solutions. In short, Ceann Comhairle, we found that while genuine efforts were being made by some lenders, that across the country, borrowers were facing a mortgage arrears environment that isn't transparent, that doesn't ensure sustainable solutions, that doesn't provide equity, that doesn't sufficiently protect people's dignity, that doesn't sufficiently protect exchequer funds, and that unnecessarily hinders economic growth and job creation. Now, the committee report calls for changes that address all of these issues. But nearly 1 year on, and an incredible 7 years into the mortgage crisis, these changes have not been implemented. They weren't implemented by the last government, and they've yet to be implemented by this government. And so the problems identified, and the problems that will be familiar to every deputy, are being played out in every circuit court in the country. And I would encourage every deputy to take a morning and go and sit through the repossession hearings that are occurring in the circuit courts in their constituencies, and they will see played out before their eyes the issues that I've raised, the issues that many other deputies have raised, the issues that are raised in the Finance Committee report. Let me give you one example from Bray Circuit Court, which I attended 2 weeks ago. In total, 10 orders for repossession were granted. In 8 of these, the borrowers, or defendants as they're called, didn't appear, and the 2 who did appear didn't have any legal representation. One of these 2, when the order for possession was granted, turned around and asked people seated in the court, what does all that mean? He didn't understand that he had just lost his home and had been given a few months to find alternative accommodation. Now, in this case, no payments had been made since 2011. So maybe there was no option other than to grant repossession. But might he have qualified for mortgage to rent? We don't know. Might a restructure have been possible before the arrears started piling up? We don't know. What penalties was the bank adding to the original mortgage payments? We don't know. Was he to be pursued for the residual debts? We don't know. What cost was there now to the state for rehousing? And could that cost have been used to keep him in his house, with the state taking an equity in the house in lieu of payments? Now, we don't know, but based on what I saw, it's unlikely he had access to financial expertise. It's unlikely that he had a professional negotiate on his behalf with the lender. And it's unlikely that he had access to legal representation, but chose not to have it in court. The motion before the House addresses the concerns raised by the Finance Committee. It addresses the failures seen in repossessions occurring around the country. If this motion is implemented, if it is voted through the Dáil this evening, it will change the case outlined above in the following ways. The man in question, when falling into arrears, will have access to financial and insolvency expertise. Every possible solution will be taken to keep him in his home, including the option of a functioning mortgage-to-rent system. The solutions would be defined as sustainable from his perspective and not just from the lender's perspective. The solutions will be available regardless of who his lender is. The insolvency option will be real and available. If court proceedings still commence, he will have legal representation in court. If the lender refuses to accept a workable solution, then formal opinion can be provided to the registrar or judge to that effect, and the registrar or judge can then refuse to grant possession. If, having explored every option, there is still no viable solution other than to sell his home, this would be spotted early in the process to avoid the build-up of arrears and maximise the residual money left over to find another home. The changes called for by the Finance Committee have not been implemented, so I have tabled this motion to give the Dáil the opportunity to debate those changes and others, and to consider adding its voice to the voice of the Finance Committee. The changes called for would immediately and substantially improve the situation currently faced by hundreds of thousands of men, women and children living in homes that are in mortgage arrears. They have waited far too long for this crisis to be resolved. There is no need for them to wait any longer. All that's needed is for the Dáil to vote through this motion tonight. Thank you.